When you pick up your phone, it just looks like a slab of glass. But inside, it still depends on tiny states flipping between on and off. But here's the strange part. That tiny trick became maths, logic, software, the internet, artificial intelligence, and whatever dopamine-hungry application you're addicted to. So how did a switch become a symbol? How did electricity become a decision? And why did a young engineer named Claude Shannon figure out a way to use electrical circuits to represent human thoughts? Today, we're looking at the idea that made computers possible. Let's debug history. Let's strip this down to something almost stupidly simple. Let's start off by picturing a light switch. When you flip it up, the light turns on. Down, the light turns off. The switch has two possible states, on, off. Now, instead of calling those states on and off, call them 1 and 0. Suddenly, the switch is no longer just controlling a bulb, it's holding information. One switch gives you one bit of information, a bit being the smallest unit of information we can work with. Think of it as one choice between two possible states. And that choice does not have to live inside a computer. A coin toss can carry one bit, heads or tails. A yes or no answer can carry a bit. A punch card can carry one bit, hole or no hole. So when we come back to our switch, the idea is simple. The switch is not impressive because it's clever. It is impressive because it gives a machine a clean physical way to hold one tiny piece of meaning. Adding a second switch expands the possible meanings from 2 to 4. That may not sound like much, but this is where the trick starts showing its teeth. Every extra switch gives the machine more possible combinations to work with. The important part is this. The switch is no longer just moving electricity. It is carrying meaning. With enough switches, you can represent a number. With enough numbers, you can represent a letter. With enough symbols arranged properly, you can represent almost anything a computer needs to handle. This is where the profound hides in the nuances of simplicity. A computer doesn't need to understand what a number means. It only needs a reliable way to represent it, and binary gives it that. It becomes the foundation of mechanical obedience, a way to make a machine follow rules without understanding them. Before computers were machines, computers were people. That was a job title. If LinkedIn existed in 1937, computer would have appeared on actual human profiles. Back then, you could not just ask ChatGPT for the square root of 768 and wait for it to answer. The answer had to be worked out by hand, often with the assistance of mathematical tables. And those tables did not just fall out of the sky wearing a little academic hat. They were prepared by people, human computers. These human computers sat in rooms with stacks of paper and enough repetition to make your soul apply for compassionate leave. The work demanded precision, but it depended on tired human attention. One copied digit in the wrong place, one skipped step, one moment of boredom, and the answer could wander off into the bushes wearing a fake moustache. Human computers were not stupid. Many of them were remarkably skilled. The problem was the work itself. It demanded patience, accuracy, and the ability to stare at numbers all day without your brain trying to escape through your ears. After a while, even careful minds begin to fray at the edges. And that was the deeper problem. Calculation was trapped inside human attention. Human attention is beautiful, but fragile. It wanders, it tires, it gets hungry, it misreads a number because somebody coughed, a chair squeaked, or the brain briefly decided to go on unpaid leave. So the question was no longer just whether humans could calculate. Clearly, they could. The question was whether we could move that work into something that does not get bored, tired, hungry, distracted, or personally offended by long division. These people had to figure out how to take the procedure out of the person and put it into a machine. The machine would then follow these steps meticulously. But one bridge was still missing. How do you connect human logic to electrical machinery? How do you make a machine follow rules without asking it to understand anything? The answer was not a giant mechanical brain. It was something far more ordinary. A switch. One switch by itself is not exactly a revolution. It's just a tiny yes or no. But connect switches together and something changes. They can start controlling each other, creating conditions, and following rules. A switch alone can hold meaning. A circuit can make the meaning do something. To understand what I mean by that, imagine a machine with one simple rule. Open the door when the card is valid and the PIN is correct. The machine does not understand the card, the PIN, or the fact that you're standing outside getting annoyed. It simply follows a condition. If it receives the right signals, it opens the door. Wrong signals, the door stays shut. Small meanings get connected into simple rules. Simple rules get connected into bigger rules. That sounds modest, but it is quietly explosive. Because if you can make a machine follow one rule, you can make it follow many. And if you can stack enough yes or no decisions together, you get something that begins to look like reasoning. The machine still doesn't understand, but it obeys. And sometimes obedience at ridiculous speed looks a lot like intelligence. But before we start applauding the switch like it just cured malaria, there is an obvious problem. Humans don't count in binary. We count in tens because we have 10 fingers. So why not build machines that use normal numbers? Why not make electricity represent 0 through 9? A reasonable idea, right up until reality enters the room with a hammer. Decimal electricity would require the machine to recognize 10 shades of signal. That is like trying to judge the brightness of a candle at a nightclub while the fog machine is choking the room and the strobe lights are interrogating your retinas. Binary avoids that nonsense. It gives the machine two clean options: dark or bright, off or on. The machine does not need to interpret a whole spectrum of fragile meanings. It only needs to recognize two clean states. That is why computers speak binary. Decimal may feel more natural to human beings, but binary is more natural to circuits. Computers were not built around what humans find elegant. They were built around what machines can repeat reliably, but that created a new problem. If machines only understand clean states, then humans have to do something deeply unnatural. We have to take messy ideas and translate them into a form the machine can survive. We can't make machines behave like a person, but we can make human ideas behave like electricity. That sounds simple, until you realize what it means. We had to take messy things like words, instructions, decisions, eventually pieces of thought itself, and turn them into symbols and rules the machine could handle. Computers do not tolerate sort of. They don't understand maybe. They're not your buddy trying to infer what you mean from the tone of your voice. They need structure and rules. They need the world chopped into pieces they can recognize. Once the translation is done, the machine can repeat the process again and again without fatigue, boredom, resentment, or a sudden urge to go outside and reconsider its life's choices. And that brings us to the next breakthrough. Representing information was only half the trick. The real question was whether those clean electrical states could represent logic itself. Now we arrive at Claude Shannon, the bridge in the story. Before him, logic and circuits lived in separate rooms. Mathematicians had formal rules for reasoning. This and that could be true together. This or that could be true. All the lovely little tools human beings use when we're trying to think clearly, which happens occasionally. Engineers had circuits, switches opened and closed, current moved through wires. To most people, those looked like different worlds. One belonged in thought, the other belonged in machinery. Shannon realized that Boolean algebra and electrical switches were basically the same little bastard wearing different hats. And by the way, Boolean algebra is just a formal way of handling true and false. In 1937, as a part of his master's work, Shannon showed that electrical switching could represent logical operations. In plain English, logic did not have to stay on paper. You could wire it. A circuit could be arranged so a signal only passed when the right conditions were met. The point is this: A machine could now follow logic using physical parts, not by understanding the rule, not by thinking about the rule, and definitely not by pausing dramatically to marvel at its own cognitive acuity. The circuit simply behaved according to the rule. If the conditions were right, the signal passed. If they were not, it stopped. Now the machine could do more than hold information. It could act on it, compare signals, choose a path, and produce a result, all without knowing what any of it meant. It was just electricity moving through pathways designed to behave like logic. The machine was not becoming human. Human reasoning was being translated into physical structures. That was Shannon's great move. He showed that switches were not just useful parts. When arranged properly, these switches could become logic. And once logic became physical, computation had a new body. Shannon did not build the modern computer by himself, but he gave engineers something they desperately needed. He gave them a way to turn logic into machinery. And once logic could be wired, a procedure no longer had to live only in a human head, a notebook, or a table of instructions. It could be built into a physical system. That changed the meaning of computation. In the old world, people followed steps by hand. They checked tables, copied numbers, applied rules, and hoped their attention did not betray them halfway through. In the new world, those steps could be moved into machines. If a rule could be expressed clearly enough, a machine could be built to follow it. And that is where the whole story clicks into place. You see, human computers showed the need, because calculation was valuable but painfully fragile when trapped inside tied human attention. Binaries supplied the representation because physical states could stand for symbols. Switches supplied the mechanism because those symbols could move through circuits. And Shannon supplied the bridge because he showed that the rules of logic could be expressed through switching circuits. A computer is not a brain in the poetic sense. It is closer to a very obedient idiot moving at terrifying speed. It doesn't understand your photo, your message, your spreadsheet, or your code. It just follows rules. Its power comes from how many rules it can follow and how quickly it can follow them. The smallest useful choice a computer can make is yes or no. So if you stack enough of those choices together, yes and no becomes arithmetic. Arithmetic becomes logic. Logic becomes software. And software becomes the world we are now living in. Shannon's insight still echoes through every modern machine. He showed that thought-like behavior could emerge from rule-following circuits and that a machine did not need a mind to manipulate meaning. And once that idea existed, the road to modern computing opened up. The smartest machines we've ever built are powered by one of the simplest ideas we've ever learned to trust. History debugged.